Alarm bells here in Germany as book talks at two university campuses were canceled this week, allegedly due to pressure from China. The online events were to mark the publication of a new biography, Xi Jinping, the most powerful man in the world, co-authored by two German journalists. But the publisher told local media that the talks were abruptly called off after Chinese interference, including from the consulate in Düsseldorf. The book talks in Hanover and Duisburg were initially sponsored by Chinese centers known as Confucius Institutes, which are affiliated with the German campuses. Both university administrations say they were not involved in the planning of the events, but are concerned about the cancellations. In a statement, the University of Duisburg-Essen said, quote, "The administration is particularly disturbed that official pressure was apparently used to stop this event. We cannot understand this decision, and it cannot be allowed to happen again." We're joined now by one of the authors of the book, Adrian Geiges, who joins us from Hamburg. Welcome to the program. Now, you were meant to be at both of these book events, but they were canceled. Can you tell us what happened?
So a few days before the event, we got contacted by the Confucius Institutes, and they said, "Oh, we are very sorry, we would like to do it." And we announced it, of course, but we got an order from Beijing not to do it. And I asked why. I mean, this is a book about China, which tells it from all sides. It's not a China bashing book. And they said, yeah, the problem is, according to their Chinese counterparts, it is a book about Xi Jinping, and they don't want this person to be touched and discussed, and that's why they hadn't been allowed to do it.
But originally they were on board to do the event, and then they said they got a call or some kind of contact from Beijing that said, please cancel this event.
Exactly. So they had been very sorry, and they said we got this pressure. They even that they got the pressure not directly from their counterparts at the Chinese universities. You know, it's always a cooperation, German university and Chinese university. In fact, their counterparts in the Chinese universities had agreed as well to these events, but they got pressure from the top not to do it, and they said their counterparts, they are even frightened, and even after they explained, "No, this is very harmful for the Confucius Institute in Germany," they said, "We don't care. This is too dangerous." That was
right, and you, as you said, you mentioned that your book is looking at the president from all sides. It's not a book that only praises him. You're a little bit critical as well. Do you feel that's the reason why this event was canceled?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm feeling is, and what they even told us, it's because, you know, there's such a cult of personality around Xi Jinping now in China, and even to portray him as a human being is too much. I mean, even to write simple facts, he was divorced or something like this, we don't care about it. We only mentioned it in a sentence in the book. Even this is too much, because they will show him in China as something like a superstar, or even like a god. And so to show him as a normal person and to show the personal history of his life is already too much for them.
Now, in response to these cancellations, the universities themselves have scheduled their own events about your book without the Confucius Institutes. One of the events was last night. Why do you think it's important that these events take place?
Oh, very important, because, I mean, what it was an attempt of censorship, so to censor not only in China itself as we know it, but to censor also in Germany and in other countries. And luckily there had been a lot of protests in the last days, a lot of media a lot of media reported about it, and this is the reason why, because it was embarrassing for the universities as well, why the universities decided to hold these events.
Adrian Geiges, the co-author of Xi Jinping, the most powerful man in the world. Thank you very much for your time. We reached out to both Confucius Institutes for comment. Here's how the Hanover Center explained its cancellation. There were differences of opinion with our Chinese partners. This meant it was no longer possible to retain the format and for the Confucius Institute to be involved. Joining me now for more is Thorsten Benner. He's the co-founder and director of the Global Public Policy Institute here in Berlin. Thorsten, thanks for taking the time. Let's talk a bit about the Confucius Institutes here in Germany. How do they operate and what kind of links do they have to the universities in this country?
Thank you for having me, Abby. Confucius Institutes are an interesting animal because unlike, for example, the German Goethe Institutes, they're not operating just independently in a third country, but we have more than a dozen Confucius Institutes that are, on the one hand, co-funded and co-run by Chinese party-state institutions, but they're part and affiliated and co-run by German universities that are committed to academic freedom, and that's just not a match.
Academic freedom, you say, academic independence. Should German universities then be linked with these institutes?
No, I don't think they should. The solution is actually pretty simple. Just cut them loose from German universities and have them just operate independently. And the German government should invest massively in independent Chinese culture and language competence and build that up at German universities. There's simply no match. It's not for no reason that in the Academic Freedom Index, China ranks to the very bottom. We cannot accept that to have Chinese funding and institutions that are co-run by Beijing affiliated with German universities. That's simply no match. It's a massive reputational risk, as we've seen also in the recent case of these cancelled lectures, where we had direct interference from Beijing on this. And but as I said, the solution is pretty simple, and Confucius Institutes are one example of the problematic tie-ups with the Chinese academic system in Germany, but they're by far not the biggest challenge, I find.
Now, Beijing is not timid about calling out instances it feels is interference by other states. Has Chancellor Merkel and her governments, her successive governments, done enough to push back on Beijing?
No, I think we've seen a turning of the tide. There's quite a few politicians who are calling out the problems involved with, if you accept Chinese funding, if you have Confucius Institutes, the risks of self-censorship, of economic espionage in academic cooperation with Beijing. But the chancellor herself, she hasn't done much. To the contrary, earlier this year, we had a case where Beijing slapped sanctions on German independent researchers and research institutes, such as the Mercator Institute for China Studies, the biggest research center on China in Europe. And all we got from the chancellery was silence, and that's not acceptable.
Thorsten, I do want to ask you then, we're going to see a new coalition government here in Germany. What could or should they do differently when it comes to Beijing?
I think they should manage the risks much better and cut any dependence on Chinese funding in the German academic sector. German professors shouldn't have any business taking consulting fees and from China, and they should speak out for academic freedom and be uncompromising on that. They should encourage collaboration, but manage the risk much better. And I do think we have a firm basis for that. The Greens and the Free Democrats have spoken up very clearly about the risks of academic freedom not being kind of held in high regard by Beijing and the risk of the cooperation. And there are quite a few in the Social Democrats who are kind of pushing for this. Also in Merkel's party, many don't buy her approach. So I do think we have an opportunity for change on this front and restructuring the relationship.
So potentially a turning of the tide with the new government there. Thorsten Benner, director of the Global Public Policy Institute. Thank you for your insights, Thorsten.